السلام عليكم ورحمة الله. هو ديفيد ميلر أستاذ سابق في جامعة بريستول في بريطانيا التي طرد منها بعد حملة شنها اللوبي الإسرائيلي عليه بسبب انتقاده لإسرائيل وللحركة الصهيونية، على الرغم من عدم تقديم أي شكوى إلى الجامعة بحق البروفيسور ميلر من قبل أي من طلابه. وقد برأته الكوينز كونسل QC، وهي مجموعة من المحامين المعتمدين والموكلة إليهم قضايا شائكة من الاتهامات بمعاداة السامية. ومع ذلك قررت الجامعة فصله من العمل بسبب مزاعم أن تعليقاته أزعجت وضايقت بين مزدوجين عددا قليلا من الطلاب المؤيدين لإسرائيل، والذين لم يكن أي منهم حتى من طلابه. ولعل الاتهامات بمعاداة السامية التي وجهت إليه جاءت عقب محاضرة ألقاها عام 2019 حول تورط الحركة الصهيونية في الترويج للإسلاموفوبيا، وهي حقيقة معروفة بين العلماء الذين يقاربون القضية الفلسطينية. يطيب لنا أن نستضيف من مدينة بريستول الأستاذ ديفيد ميلر، عالم الاجتماع منذ 3 عقود، المتخصص في الإسلاموفوبيا والحملات الدعائية البروباغندا، حيث يشرح ملابسات قضيته وما حدث معه بالفعل، وما سر هذه الحملة المنسقة والمسعورة ضده، وهذا النشاط المكثف من قبل اللوبي الصهيوني وممارساته البشعة عبر أذرعه المستحدثة داخل الجامعات البريطانية وعلى طول المشهد السياسي البريطاني وعرضه. وماذا عن الحرية الأكاديمية في المملكة المتحدة اليوم في سياق الدفاع عن أحقية القضية الفلسطينية في مقابل وحشية الاحتلال الإسرائيلي في فلسطين؟ وألا يجدر بكل أكاديمي وطالب في البلاد أن يشعر بقلق عميق إزاء هذا الهجوم الممنهج على الحرية الأكاديمية؟ أهلا بكم إلى حلقة جديدة من الداخل. معكم زينب صفار، تابعونا. Professor David Miller, prominent British political sociologist whose research and publications focus on Islamophobia and propaganda, joining us from Bristol. Welcome to Min al-Dakhil from the Inside, sir.
Thank you.
Pure pleasure to have you. Well, sir, a hurricane and a tempest of attacks were unchained against you that have crossed the level of academia on the basis that your comments, whether in a lecture or in an article in the electronic intifada against Israel, will lead to hate crimes. Let's rewind, unveil, and explain what happened in full depth, Dr. Miller.
So I arrived at the University of Bristol in late 2018, and in early February 2019 I gave a lecture on Islamophobia where I explained the work that I have done in the area, and in particular I mentioned one of what I call the 5 pillars of Islamophobia, which is parts of the Zionist movement. The Zionist movement is prominent in the attempts to spread Islamophobia and hatred of Muslims around the world. And I mentioned this in my lecture. I've published on this, and it's not really a controversial matter. But nevertheless, some pro-Israel organizations got together and complained about this to the university. The university rejected that complaint, but they didn't let up, and they carried on a campaign for some 2.5, nearly 3 years to have me removed from my post. In the end, they said to me, the university said to me that it wasn't that I had said anything which was anti-Semitic. They'd found that I was not in any way not a single word that I had said was ever anti-Semitic. They said rather that the words that I had used were used in a way which might lead to some Jewish students feeling unsafe. Now, the words I used were that I simply described that I had been attacked by pro-Israel groups on and off campus by them making complaints about me, which, of course, was a matter of fact, which nobody has ever denied. So that's the position. Now, they sacked me for the way in which I used the word attacked effectively.
In response to your sacking, a petition was set up in support of you, and an open letter to the university was signed by hundreds of public intellectuals and academics, including Noam Chomsky, as well as several dozen Bristol University academics, demanding your reinstatement. After the university appointed, of course, as we know, and you mentioned, a Queen's Counsel, QC, to investigate you for most of the year of 2020, and it was determined that you have not been in any way anti-Semitic. Not a single word or a sentence or a thing you had said was in any way anti-Semitic, and the complaint was entirely rejected. But the university would not publish that finding or the report. It was confidential, as they said, and you were not allowed to mention that you had been entirely cleared of complaints of anti-Semitism. Why, Dr. Miller, and on what grounds did the university terminate your contract, sir?
So yes, as you say, the report entirely cleared me. They wouldn't publish it, and I wasn't allowed to refer to the fact that I had been cleared entirely. And so when the next wave of complaints came, I wasn't allowed to defend myself by the university. And then what happened was, because of the next spate of complaints, they commissioned another report, a further QC report, which again found me entirely innocent of anything remotely like anti-Semitism, because of course I am an anti-racist. But nevertheless, they used that report, they took that report, they ignored the findings, and they decided that it was just the tone of my comments, that I had said words about pro-Israel students which somehow were biased against Jewish students in general, although of course I had always made clear, and the QC reports both said this, that I'd always made clear the distinction between Jewish people and pro-Israel forces, or Zionists, as they're known.
We will talk a bit more and highlight this particular venue of the attack against you. But however, Dr. Miller, Jewish supporters of you stated that, well, Jewish opinion and Zionism has always been diverse, and that the attacks on you will, quote, chill free speech on Israel if left unchallenged, unquote. Don't you think that a healthy society is one where people can speak the truth, even about uncomfortable subjects, and that no one should lose their job for telling the truth?
Well, of course, I agree with that, but we don't live in that kind of healthy society. We live in a society where to criticize Israel in any way is regarded as being more or less the same as anti-Semitism. And this, of course, is a strategy adopted by the State of Israel itself, and it's developed this strategy over the last 2 decades through a body called the Global Forum for Countering or Combating Anti-Semitism. That's where they've developed this strategy to blur together anti-Semitism with anti-Zionism, and they've rolled this strategy out through all the lobby groups which they operate and operate with in the UK, where I am, and in many other countries, especially Western countries, and that the whole point of this is to silence all criticism. So I speaking to you now, in the week after the murder of Shireen Abu Akleh in Jenin in occupied Palestine, and we see there the utter contempt that the Israelis have for the prospect of telling the truth about what's happening in Palestine. It doesn't just go to the level of killing journalists. It's across the whole of the world. The ability of anybody to speak out is being increasingly challenged by the Zionists and by their lobby groups all over the world.
Right. Of course, anti-Semitism and criticism of Israel are two separate and different things. Tell us about the thing that you mentioned, the strategic use of anti-Semitism allegations, especially on campuses and elsewhere, to set up new organizations that function, of which is their ultimate function is to troll, to bludgeon, to complain, to make up stuff, to dredge up facts or seeming facts from the past, to use these to target people in local councils, in schools and trade unions, and of course the universities, to remove a whole cadre of people who will stand up for Palestinians.
That's right. So they have this forum. They've been running it since the year 2000, where they developed the idea that there was a new anti-Semitism, that anti-Semitism in the past was something which was associated with the far right, with the Nazi right, but that today there is a new form of anti-Semitism, and that is an anti-Semitism of the left, and in particular associated with Muslims. And here we have, of course, the classic question of Zionist Islamophobia, and that they worked on this development of these concepts, and they then put them into use through a whole range of different organizations. So this is the second element of their strategy. From 2009 and the attack on Gaza and 2011, also they started to create a whole range of new organizations in many different countries. In the UK, where I am, they created between 2013 and 15, approximately 40 or 50 new pro-Israel organizations, which are not due to some kind of upsurge of pro-Israel feeling amongst British citizens or British Jews, but to do with money, in particular, coming from Israel through the Ministry of Strategic Affairs. And they created this whole range of new groups to monitor the media, to troll people, to dig up their old social media, to make complaints, strategic and fake complaints like they made against me, that people on the left or Muslims are in some way intrinsically anti-Semitic because they criticize Israel. And that's the key thing. If you criticize Israel, you are by definition an anti-Semite.
Let's examine this matter more, Dr. Miller. You have founded the organization Spinwatch, the UK's lobbying watchdog, that has investigated various UK lobby groups. Might you, sir, highlight some of these groups and their influence in this regard, especially the degree of influence that Zionist advocates and lobbyists for Israel have over disciplinary processes and the Labour Party policy that you know of?
Yes, so I've been doing research on lobbying for a number of decades now, looking first of all at corporate lobbying and at the corruption of the rise of money in politics in the period which we call the neoliberal period from 1979 or so onwards, with the wave of privatizations and globalization all over the world. And we've campaigned for transparency in that regard, for organizations and lobby companies to admit who they were working for, and we've done that in relation also to the Israel lobby and to Zionism. More recently, the work that I've done on Zionism, on the Israel lobby, has focused in particular on the fact that there are many, just in this country alone, many hundreds of Zionist organizations which are engaged in trying to obscure the truth about Israel, and are usually not very transparent about where their money comes from, or the fact that they're operating effectively on behalf of the Israeli government. Now, these organizations were at the forefront of the attack on the leadership of the Labour Party in this country of Jeremy Corbyn, the first full-throated advocate of Palestinian rights that had ever led the Labour Party.
Can you name some more of these organizations and bodies, please?
So, I mean, amongst the most important ones, you have the formal Zionist organizations. That's the ones which are affiliated in some way directly to the World Zionist Organization. So the most obvious ones in the UK context, in my context, the Union of Jewish Students is a formal Zionist organization. It attacked me. In the Labour Party, there is the Jewish Labour Movement, which frames itself as being a socialist organization, but which is of course, directly affiliated to the World Zionist Organization, and thus signs up to its Jerusalem program, the manifesto, and the constitution of the World Zionist Organization. Also within the Labour Party, not formally a Zionist organization, but the Labour Friends of Israel, which under Tony Blair's leadership, almost every Labour MP was a member of, some less than that after Jeremy Corbyn came to power. And then more broadly, there are the troll organisations that you have been mentioning. There's a troll account called Nasser Jew. There's an organisation called Labour Against Anti-Semitism. And all of these organisations are dedicated to try and remove the possibility of access even to membership of the Labour Party by supporters of Palestinian rights. And there's another organisation called the Campaign Against Anti-Semitism,
sure,
which is linked to the Zionist organisation, the Jewish National Fund. And one of its members proclaimed when Corbyn was removed as the leader of the Labour Party, he said, "The beast is slain." And they congratulated themselves for their role in the removal of the overwhelmingly democratically elected leader of the Labour Party. So there are many of these organisations. I've named a few, but there are many more.
To what extent is the Israel lobby in the UK concerned about the fact that public opinion opposes them?
Well, they're extremely concerned. This is why they have created all these organisations, because they know that that worldwide they have no support. They know that even in countries where there are large politically active Jewish communities, that the support for them is slipping in the public in general, and indeed amongst the Jewish community. In America and in the UK, the Jewish community are moving away from the Zionism and from hardline Zionism, and that really very, very much worries them. And they're trying to shore up their support by creating these hundreds of organisations, which makes it look like there is some kind of support for the extremist policies which they espouse. And it's a strategy which is used in other political issues by other political factions, and it's a strategy to pretend that there is mass support for something which is really, in actual fact, very unpopular.
Sir, Professor Miller, despite this, the Israeli lobby is still able to deliver its version of the story and have the upper hand or the final say when it comes to criticism against Israel in the UK, so to say. Do you believe that they have won and you have lost your case?
Well, I mean, they certainly win. There are examples of them winning. The fact that I have been sacked, I mean, it's an extraordinary indication of the reach and power that they have. I was a senior professor in a very established university, and it's unprecedented for someone to be sacked for saying something where the tone was wrong. And there are many other examples of people who were removed from their positions, their jobs, their membership of the Labour Party, etc. And those are victories. Let's be clear; those are victories for the Zionists. But they are frantic because they are losing support, and there will come a time, hopefully soon, where that support will collapse. It won't just ebb gradually; it will collapse, and we see the collapse of this coming when we see the insecurity of the Zionist regime itself in occupied Palestine. I mean, just to give one example, in the last week alone, the Defence Minister Benny Gantz saying that they are under real threat. There is instability in the what's called the occupied territories, and they do not think they can control it, and they are concerned that they may collapse. And that collapse, that worry about that collapse, feeds through into the strategies in the UK and the US and elsewhere. And what we see in that regard then is really that we are on the brink of a victory in Palestine, and that's a real possibility now, which wasn't the case 18 months ago.
Sure. How do you picture the future of academics, students who are supportive of human rights and consequently who are supportive of Palestinian rights in light of what happened with you? What about academic freedom, sir?
Well, there is no academic freedom on this topic, and that's the problem.
Unfortunately.
Unfortunately, there's not. And so, I mean, the one solution that people think when they are attacked in this way is they say, oh, well, maybe I misspoke. Maybe what I said had the wrong emphasis. I will apologize. I will reach out. I will show that I don't hate Jews. I'll go and meet some local Jewish people, and that will be the issue sorted. But no, that will not work. That has not worked, didn't work with the Labour Party, and will never work. What they want is to remove us and to silence us. And the only way for us to stop that happening is to fight back and to to make it clear on an evidence-based basis. I'm a researcher. I find things out. I find facts out about how this operation works.
Are you still fighting back, sir?
We are still fighting back, and we will win in the longer term.
Sure. You said that Israel wants to impose its will all over the world. Those words to which you were condemned and lost your job and attacked by a large swathe of politicians. Don't you think that the cold-blooded assassination of the prominent Palestinian journalist, you mentioned her, Shireen Abu Akleh, that the Israelis are actually, and it's a fact, that they are imposing their will all over the world, and that Israel wants to send yet another message to the Palestinians and their supporters across the globe that no one is safe?
Yes, that's right. I mean, when I said Israel wants to impose its will all over the world, there was this confected outrage. How could he say this? This smacks of Jewish conspiracy theories. And of course, it doesn't. It's got nothing to do with the Jews. It's to do with the actual foreign policy strategies of the Zionist regime in occupied Palestine and its army of followers and organizations all around the world. These are not things that I've dreamt up. These are organizations which proudly proclaim, for the most part, that they are Zionists, that they stand with the idea of a Jewish state, meaning a Jewish state which excludes the Palestinians, and they stand with the idea that there will always be such a thing. Now that's a political message which they themselves state, and all I've done is call attention to that. It remains the case that the Israelis are doing this. And they don't just do it through the lobby, of course. As you mentioned, they do it with bullets in Palestine, and they do it, of course, with bullets elsewhere. The Israeli state has assassinated people in more than 10 countries around the world, sent their emissaries, their intelligence operatives to do that. So there is a real threat from the Israelis all around the world.
You are also, sir, a reader in film and media studies. How are films and the showbiz industry used as a propaganda tool, knowing that you are the director of the Organization for Propaganda Studies and a member of the Working Group on Syria, Propaganda and Media, SPM. Actually, you co-wrote an SPM paper on the Douma chemical attack, which said that the Syrian government had not used chemical weapons in Douma.
That's right. Well, that's a big question. I mean, clearly the way in which media are used to justify and excuse and obscure what's happening in Palestine is of very great significance. The whole of the world's media, in particularly in the West, is not able to properly cover what happens in Palestine. We saw that with Shireen Abu Akleh's murder the other day, where there's a reluctance to use the word killed, and that reluctance in the newsrooms is replicated in factual and non-factual and fictional media all around the world. On the question of Syria, I mean, people, I think, don't realize the extent of the propaganda which tries to manipulate world events. Now, in the case of Syria, we're not talking of Israel. Israel has a role in the Syrian conflict, as we speak. There are Israeli attacks on Syria. But in the Douma case, what was going on there was that there was a presentation of a chemical weapons attack by an opposition group, which was backed by and supported by British intelligence services. And that's what we've seen through the Syrian conflict, is the attempt to cross the red line to show that the Syrians had used chemical weapons so that the West could intervene. And of course they did after the Douma case. In the Douma case, these were 2 chlorine cylinders which were placed in position by the opposition group, captured by rebel media, funded in part and supported by Britain's MI6. And this was classically a false flag to try and present to the world that the Assad government had committed a chemical weapons attack, which it plainly had not. And when we first said this, there was mass outrage about it. But what then happened was that the inspectors who were involved from the Organization for the Prevention of Chemical Weapons themselves leaked documents which showed that there had been no chemical weapons attack, and they've now since then have on several occasions addressed the UN Security Council, and it's an open secret that there was no chemical weapons attack in Douma.
Right, Professor David Miller, prominent political sociologist. Thank you very much, sir, for your insightful ideas and your sound and constructive, unwaning support of Palestine and the Palestinian cause, and of course, your resilience.
Thank you.
Always a pleasure to have you, sir. ودائما الشكر لكم مشاهدينا الكرام على طيب المتابعة. للتفاعل أكثر تابعونا على صفحات السوشيال ميديا، وحتى نلتقي من كل فريق عمل من الداخل من كل الميادين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله.